everyone, thank you so much for coming. We are so excited that so many people were interested in this really wonderful opportunity to learn about op-ed writing from John Sinif, who joins us today from Subject Matter. He is the Senior Vice President for Content. Subject Matter is a Washington, D.C. communications firm. We're delighted that he's here. We wanted to, one small piece of housekeeping before we begin. We just wanted to let you know that the advocacy training workshop that is being run by Ayelet Hines and Bill Jernigan will be held on Saturday, December 17th, and more details will be forthcoming in email. I also wanted to thank our sponsors today of this event, which are the Office of External Affairs, the Department of Health, Behavior and Society, the Student Assembly, Spark, and the MPH program. So John is here. He's going to talk to us sort of about the do's and don'ts and the whys of why we work on op-eds and how we share our opinions and our knowledge with the outside world. So thank you very much for coming, and I want to introduce John Sinif.
Thanks, Stephanie. A little background. Before this, for 20 years, I was at USA Today. And I was everything from page one editor to op-ed editor for 8 years to cover story editor. And the job that I think spoke to me the most was being op-ed editor and working on the opinion page and on the editorial board. And part of my mission was to try to find people like you all to write and to really to tell the world what was going on and to make sense of things that sometimes were nonsensical. And one of the biggest challenges I think today is that we don't have enough of the right voices out there. Enough of the right voices articulating public policy, articulating what should happen, and the people who speak the most in the public square today seem to be, or often are, the people who have the least to say. So that's why I'm here. I see this as my passion and my mission during my 8 years was to bring more people like you onto the op-ed pages and now opinion sites at USA Today specifically. And frankly, with no insult to anyone, to look less like the big painting behind me and more like this room. And that was a challenge. I think that at the end of this, I'm going to give you some tips on how to write, how to think about writing. It's not going to be formulaic because I don't think that creativity there's no formula for creativity, and I think this is creative writing. And I'll tell you this, that we used to get 100 submissions every day at USA Today. We had too many from Washington, we had too many from corporate America, and not enough from the academy and from people who actually knew the subject matter. A lot of people will, and you'll see this today, a lot of people will adopt and pick up research and the work that's being done here at the School of Public Health, and good for them. We need those voices, we need people to articulate the positions. But you all are going to have the authority and the voice and the background and the knowledge to do something that even someone like me is not going to be able to do. So I hope at the end of this that you feel encouraged. I hope that you, I unplugged it, look at that.
Oh, did you?
No. Hold on, sorry, technical difficulties. All right.
There we go.
Okay, sorry. I hope you feel encouraged. I hope you feel like you have the tools, and in some ways I want to demystify what op-ed writing is. So I'm going to stand here for a little bit. It's kind of uncomfortable to stand in one place. I'll move a little bit if I can. But stop and ask questions. I will have time at the end for you to ask questions, but don't hesitate to stop. I'll repeat your question as best I can because it's being recorded, and we'll go from there. So why op-eds? It sounds like something that's dated. It sounds like something that people, especially people maybe in this room, that it's not as relevant in an age where media are dying. News organizations barely have enough people to get the daily news out, let alone media opinion sections. But they still carry weight. They're still relevant. And for the type of work that you're going to do and the type of research and the subject matter that you are going to have your expertise in already do, it's a way to get into other media and to snowball your message and to really influence not only public opinion on issues, but also public policy, which I think is important when it comes to funding, when it comes to the things that certainly matter to the school and matter for the work that you're going to be doing. It's a way to crystallize your thinking too. Whether it be talking to others at the school, whether it be talking to colleagues at conferences, that the exercise of writing an op-ed is something that I think it helps you to magnify what you're doing, but also it makes you internalize and kind of really understand how to convey what you're doing to a lay audience. That matters greatly today. I think it matters more than it ever has. I'll talk about why you. So you will be painting a global canvas in this school. And the work that you do here is really, really important. I always said, as an op-ed editor, no one is going to die because of something that I do. No one's going to live necessarily because of something that I do. But you all are doing such meaningful and impactful and important work that to me, it's, without sounding hyperbolic here, it's almost a dereliction of duty to not try to convey that to other people. And I know there's a reluctance of people to step out and to be a voice, a public voice for things. It's not, I'm not comfortable doing it. It's very difficult, and I'll talk about that a little bit when my experience with writing a piece and what that felt like to me. But put aside the fear, put aside some of those things, and think about ultimately think about the work that you're doing and how your public voice can help to inform that work and help to amplify it and help to make differences in people's lives. I think it's important today more than ever, as I alluded to, because credentialed people like all of you, you have an instant voice of authority on your issues. Like, I should listen to you. People should listen to you. So make them listen. Let them listen. And then finally, we live in this weird post-factual world. But facts and the art of persuasion are still the best antidote for that. And I know that doesn't feel like that's the case right now, maybe. It doesn't to me. But it's true. It really is true. So this is the why now. I thought it was important to get people to write 10 years ago. I thought it was important for people to put themselves before an audience of millions 10 years ago. When you look at the issues that are important to not only the school but the planet, climate change, guns, obesity, vaccines. I have 2 young children. Vaccines. Public buy-in matters. It matters. It still matters. It mattered a year ago. It mattered 3 weeks ago. It matters next year. And I'll tell you, in an age of faux news, I swear, like the one headline, the Post-Truth named 2016 Word of the Year by Oxford Dictionaries. That's an Onion headline. That's not a Washington Post headline, but it is. So my uncle, I thought about this yesterday. My uncle was a professor of ecology at the University of Minnesota, and he would do exploration in Antarctica, tracking seals. He did that, tracking seals and their migration patterns. But about a decade ago, I was talking with him about climate change, and it was at a family function in San Antonio. It was a hot summer day. And I said, what have you seen? You've been going there since the 1960s. Like, what have you seen? And he explained, he said, it's been changing before people started talking about it, before they called it global warming, before they called it climate, whatever. He said he noticed things. And there weren't a lot of people who were spending their time up in Antarctica at the time. And he said, even this is 2006, he said, to deny climate change is to deny our reality. And so I ask all of you, when you're thinking about whether you even want to do this or whether you're comfortable doing it, is that he's one of the world's witnesses. And I think the work that you're doing allows you to be the world's witness. And we need more people who are actually witnessing it, who understand it, who understand the research, and who will be a voice of truth in a post-truth world. By the way, a little aside, there is, if you Google Sinif Bay, my last name's not very common. Sinif Bay, there's a little place in Antarctica named after my uncle. No one goes there, but. So this is the why. So kind of need you guys to save the world right now. I hate to put it on you. I know, like, I don't know if you have finals or what's going on right now. But it's important. It's important. It's all on you. And these are my guys. So it's Luke on the left, Sebastian on the right. Without getting all schmaltzy, but really, children will help crystallize your thinking about what's going on around you. And these little guys, this was Luke. Luke was doing tummy time, and Sebastian wanted to show that he can do tummy time. But anti-vax movement, things like that, climate change. I like to think I'm an optimist, and I like to think that everything's going to be solved by the time they're teenagers, and that I can tell them about this wretched period we went through. And I'm going to come back to a class or a room that I stood in, and people who are actually in 10 years when they're teenagers who will be changing the world and saving lives. It's all going to be solved by then, right? So now I want to talk a little bit about how to think about op-ed writing and what type of things that you could do and what type of writing that you could do. Because it's not all just your expertise. It's not all just the things that you're studying right now. So I wrote an op-ed 2.5 years ago, about my brother's suicide. And he had taken his life 1.5 years before that. And I had written before, I had done columns for USA Today, but I had never done anything like this. Do I have expertise in suicides? I do now. Did I then? No. Do I have expertise in guns? No. But when country singer Minnie McCready, when she had taken her life, there was a lot of media around it at the time. And I'm not someone who follows the celebrity pages. I'm not someone who reads that stuff. But there was something about this that made me feel compelled to offer my voice and to lend my voice to it. So I wrote this piece. It's not a guns piece. It's not even. It's a suicide piece. It's an awareness piece. And what I wanted to achieve by writing it is to get people to think about this issue differently. And I'll talk about the process that I went through a little bit in doing this, because it wasn't an easy process. As the excerpt here is, people who I worked with in the newsroom had no idea he had died by his own hand. And they found out when they read this. So you have your professional expertise and you have your personal stories. When you leave here today, search your personal stories and see where those experiences can inform your writing and your thinking. And sometimes Samir, one of your the students in the school, or a PhD student, and I may get that wrong, but he has a piece today in Vox that I think maybe will be circulated. It's a fantastic piece. It's an op-ed about his experience and his family's experience as a Muslim American, and what he has experienced and what he fears. And it's a masterful piece. If there was one piece that I read it today, it was published today, if there was one piece that I would have brought to you, it would have been something like that. It doesn't get any better than that, and I really encourage you to read it. But it ties in, and what I was getting, it ties in the personal and the professional. It's difficult to do these things, but there are great rewards in doing them. And I want to talk about both of those, because I do want you to think about this with your eyes wide open. I put the excerpt there from Facebook, that post I included, because it wasn't one of the worst things that was said to me in the wake of writing this. And now I can look back at it a little bit 3 years later and say, wow, 3 people liked that comment. They liked that he put that. And it's really rich and ironic that someone in Chicago would talk to me about guns. 700 homicides just this year alone. But I digress. On some subjects, and I don't want to, in some subjects you're going to become a target just by being out there. And I've heard this with my journalism colleagues, friends now, and people in TV, specifically women, how they become targets. And I know you probably read about a lot of this. Misogyny that is directed at women who become public voices is just, it's unconscionable. But you step out into public discourse and you'll taste the bile of today's public discourse. You will. But for every jab and dagger, there is a reward. I'm going to play, if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to play a couple little clips from an interview I did with Don Lemon right after this, right after I wrote the piece.
To go public about his older brother's suicide after troubled country singer Mindy McCready ended her life. USA Today cover story editor John Smith wrote about losing his brother Ted. He wrote this: I knew that he'd been battling debilitating back pain, alcoholism, drug abuse, and depression for years. This familiar cocktail steals lives every day in this country. I ache still as I recall his sad eyes, and we can't keep looking the other way. John Smith joins us now live from Washington, D.C. First of all, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm fine, Don. Thanks for having me on the show and for tackling this topic.
It is a difficult and emotional topic, so tell us about your brother Ted. Did he feel ashamed about seeking treatment for mental health issues?
I don't know if he felt ashamed as much as he was so far into it, and his life had taken what he saw as such a desperate turn that it was not only the depression, but it was the anxiety that accompanied that. It was the drugs that he had become accustomed to because of the really debilitating back pain that I wrote about. And it was a lot more than that. And I think that people who are depressed and who have these things going on in their lives, it gets to a point where sometimes they just see no way out, and it starts to spiral from there.
So a couple points I want to make about this. One is that the interview I did was about stigma, and stigma was one line in the piece, and I thought it was important to talk about the stigma. It wasn't a stigma about seeking treatment, it was a stigma about suicide and the survivors. But nonetheless, the interview went on, and Dr. Drew came on and talked about stigma, and he had helped to treat Mindy McCready, but just how society views suicide. But one of the things that didn't even strike me at the time that strikes me now is opioids. And that my brother, he died in 2011, and he was addicted to opioids and had been for a while. And I knew that. I didn't think of it in the way that I do today. And I think I wouldn't think of it the way I do now without the work of a school like Johns Hopkins. So again, this led to other things. The colleagues that came forward and said that they too had members of their family who had taken their own lives. One, I spent half an hour on the phone with a man in Florida who had called into our newsroom, and his sister had taken her life a year before. So the conversation that it started was in itself its own reward, as much as it's hard to take good out of something that was terribly tragic for my family. But sometimes stepping out and stepping on, this was one of my first times really to step out on the high wire of op-ed writing and opinion writing and to expose yourself. There are things that many of you are thinking about right now that would be a public service for you to step out and talk about. So search your souls and see if it's something you want to pursue, because the rewards far outweigh the Dave Valent from Chicagoland. I'm going to play one more clip for you.
Ted died by killing himself. Ted died in suicide. But it's something that people would immediately feel discomfort, and it would make me lock up the conversation. The fact is, I can tell you that this week, after writing that column and reaching out to people, my friends who have known me, my colleagues, it's been, not only it's been cathartic, it's been emotionally draining to hear how many people are affected by this, and how many people, whether it be guns or pills or whatever, but how many people have experienced this kind of pain in their lives and haven't talked about it.
Yeah.
So one light moment about the day that I went in to do that, I had agreed to do it, and I haven't done TV before. And I realized it was going to be a live interview. And I was laying in the living room, and my wife was in the other room, and I'm never quiet. And she comes in, and I was just laying there like this. She goes, what's wrong? And I said, I have to go on live TV, and I'm going to completely bomb. This is going to be awful. It went fine, but you can, if I can do this, any of you can absolutely do it. So it's not clicking forward. Hold on. Oh, there we go. All right. Okay. So you have decided you're going to do this, right? I'm not doing a PowerPoint where they like come out, every question comes out, so I'm just going to kind of go over these. These are questions that I really encourage you to ask yourself and kind of an exercise at the end to do. Are you comfortable taking the position and you're thinking personally and professionally? Is there a professional risk? That's a real question. Is there a personal risk? Family and friends. Before I wrote this, I reached out to a lot of my family members. I grew up in South Texas. Guns are part of the culture. They were not part of my culture, specifically me. But they were with other family members. And I made a decision to write it, but I also got some pushback from family. Does the public benefit outweigh these risks? I think that's an important question. And it was an easy one to answer for me. And then, of course, no one has to tell you all about what lives digitally today. But I think that's one we're thinking about too. Put yourself forward 20 years and think, how is this piece going to look in 20 years? And the last question, I think, is a really, really important one. It's more of an exercise. My wife suggested that when I was getting a little bit of flack and internal turmoil about whether I would do it, she said, why don't you just write while you're writing it? And so I did it. And it's something that when I started getting feedback from people and I started getting some of the venom that you would get by writing about guns in this country, that I went back and read it, and you know, it was water off a duck at that point. I knew what I had done is right. Isn't that South Texas, like a water off a duck? Why'd I say that? But it's true. It didn't bother me nearly as much. All right, so it's my segue slide to do this. Yeah. All right. So one more. This is the last video.
You have no authority. None. Mexico City. What were you doing there? I was taking some overdue holiday.
So what's going on?
All right.
So you're finished?
You get the point. I'm not even the biggest James Bond fan, but the trailers are always really good. And 3 paragraphs, you have 3 paragraphs in an op-ed to really make an impression. And so you have to spend a lot of time on that. Don't overly obsess. Like if you, whatever your writing style is, sometimes you just dump it out and then come back to it. But your opening of a piece and then the pitch that will follow that is going to make or break whether you land your piece. So spend a lot of time on it. Not every piece demands a dramatic, grab you by the shirt collar lead, but it's something that that you should really work on a lot. Don't preach to the choir. This is one of the ones that I would fight back on the most. And what was great being an op-ed editor is that when people would submit things, I was accused of being like a crazy left as far left as you can get, liberal, and I was also accused of being far right, conservative, and that means I was probably doing my job, because what I did with every piece that came in is I took a contrarian approach to it, and I'm like, how am I going to tear this piece apart? What arguments don't fly with this person or that person? And we all love praise. We love to you know who your people are. You want them to like what you're doing. It's human nature. And you need to, don't fall into that trap, because that's how you have weak arguments. That's how weak arguments end up being published. And that's how you don't change minds. I think ultimately if you commit to going in and doing op-ed writing or any kind of opinion writing, you should be thinking about, how am I going to change someone's mind? The people who really right now who in some ways you resent and you think, how do you change their mind? And that's how I like to think about opinion writing. Go into it thinking that you're going to persuade. So engaging in an argument, disassemble it. Disassemble your opponent's argument. At the end of it, you should feel like, there. You like that? You should feel like it's done. It's a challenge. You all like a challenge. Anyone who's at this point in your academic career likes a challenge. It's a writing challenge, but it's really a thinking challenge. I don't know why I really like this photo of the bird. Bring a unique insight. This is one I used to use a slide when I would do this. It'd say Hitler is bad. All right, Hitler's bad. Sorry. But what are you saying that hasn't been said? And what are you saying that is very different? Now, I'm going to argue against myself a little bit here because everything's been said on any issue. If you're reading post-election stuff, I was talking to Stephanie about this, post-election stuff, I read for 48 hours, I think I read everything that was published on the planet. And then I realized everything had been said. It hadn't been said. But find a different lane, even if it's a topic that you've seen dissected in the news. There are those things that you read and that they stop in, they keep bugging, like 3 days later you're like, God. Those are the things you need to think about writing on, because those are the things that your intellectual appetite hasn't been satisfied yet. And if you're experiencing it, so are readers, so are other people out there, so are your friends and colleagues and all that. And you need to scratch that itch. Like, those things will come back to you. Bring an opinion. It's an opinion section. And I run into this more with academics, with due respect. But you know the research, you know the issues, you know it better than anyone. You sleep, you're dreaming about it, but you don't have an opinion. You don't want to have an opinion. And I know that it feels uncomfortable. It really feels uncomfortable for faculty. But op-eds are all about opinion. And if you're writing a piece and you're done, and if you read it and you think no one will disagree with this, then you have a problem. You have a problem if it's an opinion piece. And if you do submit something that's really good, like the research is there, the storytelling is there, it's all there, great headline on it, and it doesn't have an opinion, you're going to get an editor like me who's going to come and try to squeeze it out of you. And you won't have thought about it, so you're going to feel like, oh my gosh, they want to run this, and maybe that's what I think. No, don't let them do that. Push back too. Never, ever, ever let an editor steer you off of what your core beliefs are with something. Because it's alluring, it's going to be published, and then this is going to happen and this, stop. No, don't do that. This is easy for you. I'll be the expert. You are going to be the experts. You are the experts. Write with confidence. So the op-ed pages used to be, I think the op-ed pages were the original, the foundation, the seeds of mansplaining happened on op-ed pages. Because it was so hard for me. It's hard for people to believe this when I say it was hard. I was always trying to bring women on to the op-ed page at USA Today, and I was successful, but op-ed pages were built, they were written, this was it, and people got comfortable with that. And this is the room, this is a picture of the room that should be occupying opinion in America, right? This is the room. So write with confidence. Ask yourself, why am I the authority to write this? Even if you believe you are, just make sure you are. Because there are people, the allure of writing, and then you're on TV and you're doing radio and all this, and it's great, and you're getting, maybe a book deal is going to happen. And then you start thinking you know more than you do. It happens. There's an internist I worked with who was a writer for me, and I'm not going to give anything else on background because you can identify him. But this person he would write on the human genome if I asked him to. He would write on a newly discovered disease in sub-Saharan Africa. He's on it. He didn't know anything. So know your limits and stop yourself. And surround yourself with people who will stop you too. That's important. Because your parents are always going to tell you to do it, right? No. So news peg, that's such a newsroom phrase, but a news peg. So this is just a piece I wrote on LinkedIn that really is kind of a jab in the ribs at all of my former colleagues in newsrooms. That op-ed writing, today you don't need a news peg. And I'm telling you that, but I'm going to tell you should have a news peg because editors still don't understand it or get it, I don't think. But that to me, it's outdated thinking that you have to have an in-the-moment study or it was in the news or the president-elect just mentioned it. There's no reason that you have to attach something to a piece arbitrarily if what you're writing about is important. For instance, if I was going to write about obesity, do I need to have a study that shows it's gone up by X percentage in the United States for the past decade? No. It's outdated thinking and it's tethered to a pre-digital world. Having said that, write a piece, be ready with the news peg, but don't think it's the be-all, end-all.
John, you got a question in the back?
Okay.
Sorry for the ignorance. What's a news peg?
Yeah, okay. See, good. That's why I wanted questions in the middle of it, because I feared going into jargon. A news peg is something that is relevant in that news moment. So for instance, Johns Hopkins publishes a study on obesity. I'm at the University of Texas. I see that study. I'm writing about it. It has nothing to do with the work I'm doing, but I insert that study into the piece because it's relevant and it was just published a week ago. It might be someone in the news, a politician that talks about who talks about something. So it's taking anything that's already circulating in that moment in the news and injecting it into a piece or folding it and making it feel like it should be there organically. Is that great? Good question. I knew I would veer into jargon. And then I'm going to do it again, a nut graph. All right. You do need this. And I'm not going to tell you there's no formula for writing. I'm not going to say ABC, do this, but it's something to think about. And so a nut graph is what newsrooms always demand, mainly in news stories, but other pieces. But it's really the crystallization of your argument. Sometimes it's the third graph, sometimes it's somewhere else. Sometimes if you have kind of this flowing, beautifully developed lead anecdote, it comes a little bit later. But there should be a point, and in op-ed writing it's important because you're usually writing in the 800 to 1,000 words, 750 to 1,000, more with the Atlantic and Vox. But it's the point when, if you're thinking about pitching it, it's where an editor goes, okay, got it. I know what they're trying to do here. And a good exercise for you too is if you're writing and you feel like you're floundering a little bit, stop and say, if I only had a one paragraph to write, and like a 3-sentence paragraph, not like a paragraph that you used to write in junior high where it's like 52 sentences. But make yourself, it's a good exercise, make yourself write a paragraph, and that's the whole piece. That's what a nut graph is. So if you can't write a good nut graph from the piece that you have in front of you, and you have difficulty writing a headline, and I don't mean a great headline, but just encapsulating what the piece is, then you probably have a problem with the piece that needs to be addressed. This piece, by the way, by Megan Moran, is fantastic if you haven't read it, on the anti-vax movement. It's one of my personal pet peeves, and actually I did a cover story at USA Today on this, and I had the reporter. Do any of you follow Yamiche Alcindor, New York Times reporter? Do you all know? You should, if you don't follow her. But Yamiche was a writer at USA Today, and she did it, and she had never worked on a health piece like this. And I had her interview my kid's pediatrician because they wouldn't let kids who weren't inoculated in the practice. But anyway, I'm really digressing here. All right, write short. So I don't mean write short, what I mean is that write to length. Pay attention to word counts of wherever you're thinking about pitching it. I would get pieces at USA Today, and I would run up to 1,000 words, pretty much, sometimes longer. But I'd get someone who would send me 2,000 words, and they would say, I need your help. And today more than ever, editors are so time-pressed that you can't assume that they're going to do your work. They're overworked, they're overwhelmed, they're on deadline, they're cranky, they're working on Christmas, they're working on holidays. So just know that you can do a lot of good by coming in at the right length. And they want turnkey copy. They want copy that's ready to publish. They'll work with you. If you have a piece and you haven't done this, I don't want to, again, scare you away. If you have a piece that needs to be published, they'll work with you on it, but just the closer it is, the easier it is to get published. Where to pitch. These are the traditional outlets. I didn't put USA Today here, and it wasn't an intentional oversight. And with all due respect to my USA Today colleagues, I would choose New York Times first if I was going to get published right now. But Vox is great. I mean, what I would say when you're thinking about the places that you want to be published, you don't have to think you're a failure if you don't hit the New York Times on your first swing. I would think, where are you going to have the greatest impact with what you're doing and the greatest chance of publication? And that can be on Medium. You can take it yourself and you can amplify it on your own social, and you can use your own networks to get it out there. There are plenty of things that have gone viral and that have done really well that weren't published by one of the major news organizations. So, but always have a plan B. I think Medium and other places are good plan Bs. Your personal blog, maybe not so much. So how to pitch. I'm actually this is one where I'm just going to read through. I have a list of things that I want. And by the way, anything, if you're interested, when I'm done, there are a couple files I could send around that are just some tips on things and how to think about things that I could send and have them make their way to you. But, and how are we on time? What time is it? We're good? Oh, easy, okay. How to pitch. Know the publication you're pitching. So read it. Have they covered the issue with, yes? Yeah. Here.
No, like move the actual microphone.
It's this guy doing this. Now, is it better if I just hold it?
Yeah.
All right, I'll do this then. Thank you, too. All right. So know the publication that you're pitching, and know whether they've covered the issue, with what kind of frequency they've covered it. Be succinct in your pitch. The worst thing for a time press editor was to get something and the piece is 800 words and the pitch is 1,000. Tell them who you are. Tell them why you're writing it briefly. Tell them your credentials. If you've been published in other places, tell them that. And that's really it. And don't ever call. That's another thing. Don't call them on the phone. I know you all, it's a generational thing. I think you probably wouldn't call. You'd want to text the editor or something. I know I would today. I don't talk on the phone all that much. But don't call. I would get people, and the worst thing was when they'd act like them. But John, yeah, who is this? So-and-so. I'm pitching a piece. I sent it to you. Have you read it yet? And it's terrible. And online is what you want. Print's very nostalgic. And I still have people who will say, hey, is it going to be in print? I have no idea. I don't even know. I did a piece for USA Today recently, and I have no idea whether it published in print. It's nice, though. I mean, it's nice because my mom will cut it out. Play up your social following. And think about your social following, too, just professionally, that matters. Eyeballs matter greatly, and there's this incredible insecurity in news organizations about getting enough clicks and all of that. So if you have 10,000 followers, say it. Say, I have a good network. If you have a network through the school or through your work, say it. Just mention that you're going to do your part in getting it out there. As I mentioned, send a ready-to-publish piece, and that as an editor, every piece that every error or every kind of challenge or question I had as I was reading through a piece, like the bar to publication got a foot higher with everything that I found. And if I'm 600 words in, I go, oh my gosh, this is going to eat up half my afternoon. I'm probably not going to use it. And then write a great headline. And this is one where not everyone's a headline writer. I get that. But get your friends, family, whoever, buy them a drink, whoever has the best headline. Whatever you need to do, headlines are important. Not only in news organizations, it's the first thing that people read on a website. You read a headline, you don't read the piece. It's no different for someone who's looking at 100 submissions a day. And I had someone who would first sort through the pieces, the 100 that would come in, and then I would get, say, 10 to look at. So it's also important in getting their attention. So how to improve? I said, read op-eds, really super obvious. Read the news, super obvious. So work on pacing and flow. So just as a writing exercise, think about what you like to read. Think about the type of opinion pieces. There's a writer up in New York who used to write for me, and he sent me the other day, he sent me 4 pieces that I had worked with him on. And he said, read the headlines that you wrote. And he was trying to say, I really like the headlines you wrote, and I don't know why this came up. But I went back and started reading his pieces again. It had been a long time, and I said, God, I loved editing. This is why I liked editing you, because you're such a good writer. So work on the pacing and things that make people want to read you, even if you're like writing about sand on a beach, like something that's terribly boring and not interesting. Work on those little things. Talk your op-ed out to a person. Talk your opinion piece out. So with a friend, like argue it out. And because sometimes, we're verbal people as opposed to, sitting down and typing out, but it helps you to sharpen your thinking in your argument. And also it'll expose some of the holes in it. And then write op-eds even if you're not going to publish it. I don't even know how many pieces or things that I've written that no one ever saw. And I would also get like weird about it, or I would like delete it after I was done because I don't want anyone to ever find this if I died tomorrow. It's so terrible. But practice writing like that, just as an exercise. And if you're not right now confident in it, you'll get more confident as you continue to work through it. Success. So it looks like this. These are all pieces that were published by faculty at the School of Public Health. If you haven't read them, I'm sure they're searchable. E-cigarettes, anti-vax, which you saw, Flint, which was an in-the-moment piece, Flint and lead, warning labels on cigarette packaging, guns on campus, that Ron Daniels and Daniel Webster, thank you, golly. And then Zika. And a lot of these led to other media, other interviews.
Another question to that.
Good.
Hi.
Yes.
I was just wondering, so, given that we're all a bunch of public health scientists and we were talking about things like vaccines, do you think by covering what we have to say on the portals or the type of magazines or newspapers you suggested would be kind of a little bit talking to the same crowd of people that might already buy into what we have to say? Like, should we be stretching outside of the boundaries of places like the New York Times to discuss those issues?
I think this goes to where you think where it's going to have the most impact. So is it thinking about the audience that you're going to seek specifically? I didn't hear part of your question. Is that?
You made that point of after you finish writing, whatever you have to write, if everybody thinks that it would be agreeable, then you shouldn't be writing it.
Yes.
And in some of the outlets that you suggested we submit to, there might be a little bit more of homogeneity of that audience that reads those outlets compared to.
I see. I think I see. So you're saying, do you want to purposely seek out a less friendly audience? Is that kind of?
Yeah, I think to get this message out, right? If we're really talking about having impact.
Yeah.
And perhaps changing.
It's a great question, and it's something I've never thought about. I think that, like someplace like the New York Times, you're going to there are going to be people who are going to read and they're going to say it was published in the Times. Of course she's going to support vaccines or whatever it is, right? So I think issue by issue, like when people ask me if I'm working with someone on an op-ed and they say, well, where is it going to publish? And I said, you haven't written it yet. Like, you know? So at the end of it, I think that's also an exercise that's worth talking to your friends and other colleagues. Like where, because I don't have all the answers. And that's why when I said where to pitch and to talk about that, you all will have great ideas that I've never thought about, places to pitch that will resonate with audiences that you know better than I do. So don't think always conventional. I think conventional because I worked in a conventional place and I had conventional outlets, and that's a lot of what I did. I branched out and I understand other platforms now, but don't limit yourself to that thinking. I think that there's something bold to be said about someone who, and just to pick, no, I don't want to go there, I don't want to say that. But to think about places where you could go where you could kind of stir things up. I think there's a value in that. And I think when you stay tethered to facts and data, you always will look good to the people who understand the issues. And you know what? And I think that you'll look good to people who don't understand it and who may not even agree with you, because it's truth, right? You're telling the truth. Yes?
You made a point about the importance of bringing an opinion in your op-ed. Maybe familiar with the phrase, more research is needed, which is sort of like an academic interpretation of the word opinion. But I wondered if you could give a little guidance or seek suggestions about how to kind of marry the concept of an opinion, which is not necessarily based on demonstrated facts and that it is.
It's a really, really good question. I'll give you an example from someone at the School of Public Health.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, more research is needed. So there are, and tell me if I get this right. So there are things that you cannot be absolute about in your writing, and you can't necessarily have an opinion on something that a race that's not finished, right? You don't know who's going to win or whatever. I love analogies, right? So how do you deal with that when you're trying to write an opinion? And I'll give you one example. Joanna Cohen with the, what's the school? Okay. Institute for Global Tobacco Control. Thank you. But she was doing a piece on e-cigarettes. And in talking with her just about the piece, the question is, what is the public position? Well, as anyone who studies or knows that world knows, it's very controversial whether they're good or bad, e-cigarettes. So this is someone who was on the FDA advisory panel, has all the expertise. When I would talk to people about this, is you had 5 people on the planet, maybe 10, who you would want to talk to about this issue. She's probably one of them, right? And the piece that she wrote that published in USA Today, she said, I don't know, which is a really powerful opinion. To say if she doesn't know, it means that we don't fully know yet. We know a lot, and you can argue it different ways, and she gave her opinions on what she thought, but ultimately, an editor tries to push you to say, well, you have to know, but you don't. So push back anytime, and that's the other thing too, is that you'll have the expertise. I always tried to read in, if a piece was submitted and it was something that I knew that I didn't have a great background in, I would spend a lot of time reading so that I could have a conversation kind of if not at this level, but at least at this level where I can kind of see their eyes. And but don't let an editor push you in a direction that you know steers the science in a way that it shouldn't be, or misinterprets data, or gives a false picture of reality.
So you talked about the post-factual world or post-truth, is that what you call it?
Yeah, that's what the Washington Post called it. That's what Oxford called it.
So I think that as researchers and as public health professionals, we're really good at using facts and we argue with data all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's a fine balance, where you have so much data and so much research that it becomes kind of dry and boring. So do you have any just general guidance on how we can kind of steer clear of that?
Yeah, the anti-vax piece is an example. There's so much research on it over the years, and I say it's like cooking. It's like salt with food. You know, a little bit's good, too much, it becomes inedible. And that's one where you send it to someone who isn't in this school. That's one where you send it to your friend from high school and ask them to read it. You know, I mean, I think part of it is practice, in that the more you do this, it'll become natural to you. But I would say, and again, I don't like formulas when it comes to writing these pieces, but think of, are there 3 pieces of data, for instance, that have to be? What's the most recent, clearly? If it's something over a period of time, research that needs to be incorporated just for context. But I don't have a great answer to say, here's the formula, but just, you know, when you're reading something, and when you leave the world of research a little bit, step out of it, you know when you're reading something that's not your expertise, when it feels weighted, and kind of give your own judgment on that, and then bring others' judgment in to help you pull you back. Because when you're wedded to it, and again, you're dreaming it and living it, it doesn't seem like that much, right? But it probably is.
So I started a lot with that, because back, like, to me, as an academic, like, evidence is very persuasive, but first, also evidence that says most people aren't persuaded like facts. So, like, what would you say is like a way to use, like, emotion or sort of, like, you know, psychology to help you persuade people to your community?
I think it's hard in mine.
John, can you just repeat the question?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I keep doing this. You have, basically, it's facts, there's data. In a post-factual world, that's not enough. How do you do other things? How can you do other things to persuade people and to bring them over and to understand your data? Right? And I think that's where your personal stories come in. And it's also the context that brings it, and that makes it real to people. Sometimes that's your personal story. Sometimes it's data. You know, I worked with someone on a piece about recently for World AIDS Day on AIDS and HIV in children, and 400 children a day still getting HIV every day. That's persuasive. That's data. So look for pieces of data that are inarguably impactful. And those have their own emotional tugs to people who have a beating heart. But think mind and heart, you know? You need to feed the mind, that's what you're gonna tether to, but also how can you move people to act and to think differently? Yes. I'll get some in the back here next, sorry.
So I have a two-part question. I have never written an op-ed or done anything other than maybe think about writing something. Do you have any tips for us to like get in the habit of getting these types of thoughts on paper? They're very different from our academic type of writing that we're used to. And also timeline of it. Is this something, what's the turnaround? Is it something that you need to jump on really quickly when it's happening in the news? When is it too late?
So two-part question. One is, how do you kind of cultivate ideas if you've never done this? And then two, kind of the timeline on executing an op-ed. So on the first, I do think it's a type of creative writing. So I would start, if I'd never done this before, I would first look at my professional life, or I would pick topics and things that I think that I had expertise on. And some of those may not lend themselves to opinion writing at all. And then I'd scour your life experiences. I think that's a really good place to find good stories. And these are stories. I mean, these are stories. They're opinion and data and all that, but they are stories. I think that's probably the best way to kind of marry the two worlds. And then as far as timing and how it works, I think there is a value in velocity today and in getting a piece out quickly if there's something that you see in the news in the moment, because our attention spans now are like this, and there is an expected churn at news organizations to react in the moment, for better or for worse. So I think it's two parts. One, if you see something that's in the news and think about the arc of a news story. If it's big enough where it's going to play out over a month, or is it something that's going to play out over 48 hours? And if it's the latter, you need to get on it and get it really submitted within 24 hours, and sometimes sooner. But there are many pieces where they have a very, very long horizon on what you can do. Evergreen pieces, in newsrooms are called evergreen pieces, and that it's something that's relevant. It's going to be relevant now. It's going to be relevant in March. Yes, you first, and then back here.
Kind of follow up on that. What does the post-pitch process look like? Like, what would you expect when to hear back, or when, or how does that work?
So each place that you're going to publish, because you're going to publish, they have different time limits of when they will get back with you. Was that your question?
Yeah. Will you hear back regardless, a yes or no, or only if it's yes?
So wherever you want to publish, look and see. They usually have guidelines as to how long it takes. I think the Post is a week, and they'll say, if you don't hear from us, have a nice day. Some places are at least nice enough to respond and tell you, and some places will even give you feedback on why it wasn't accepted. You can always ask for feedback. When I had time, I would give people feedback and even edits on pieces that were submitted. But it depends. And when it comes to pitching, there is a pitching order. You only pitch one place at a time, just as a rule, or you'll burn bridges if you don't. But that doesn't mean that you are captive for a week of the New York Times or 2 weeks if it takes them that long. You can circle back to them, but do circle back and say, because of time sensitivities or because I'm tired of waiting for you insufferable editors, I'm going to submit somewhere else, and I'm withdrawing the submission just as a courtesy, even though they didn't have the courtesy to respond. Yes?
Can you submit something that was published somewhere else before, like something that you got on Facebook or like a personal blog or something like that?
Can you submit something that's been published somewhere else was the question, even if it's on Facebook or a personal blog or something? Generally, the answer is no. So think that it's no, and then you can always ask. Now, if you have, so for instance, I did a piece maybe a month ago or 2 months ago about an Uber driver in DC that we had this just really kind of a life-changing for me, at least conversation. I started a GoFundMe page for her afterwards. Her name is Banafsha. Her husband had died a year before, November 30th, and we just had, in like an 8-minute ride, a conversation that I decided to write about. And then I posted something about just the experience on Facebook, and I got an outpouring from people saying, you should write this. So I wrote it, and it was published in USA Today. It was a different piece, and the essence of it was my Facebook post, so it became a piece. Some places, if you have a fully fleshed out piece that you published on your own personal blog that's going to get 50 people or 100 people to read it, you're fine. But if it's someplace where you even published it in like a local publication or something is going to resonate a little bit, or that a Google search is going to find and be problematic as far as whether it's going to land, then you should probably at least, if nothing else, let them know that it was published elsewhere in some form. Yes?
John, what's the editing process? Like if someone's interested in publishing your piece, but the editor wants to make edits to it, like how does that work? And who has the final say?
You always have the final say. And, but the process is you submit, usually they say, I like it, I'll work with you on it. There's never a guarantee of publication until you see it published, and I would always tell people that because you go and tell everyone, I'm going to be published and it's amazing and I can't wait, and then something happens, news happens or whatever. So always just assume that it's not published until it's published. But the process it's pretty straightforward. It usually is just a back and forth with an editor. You always have the final say. And I'd say, I was telling Stephanie, it would always make me least comfortable when I would do a pretty dramatic rewrite of a piece, and I'd get it back from the writer, and they'd say, it's great. I'm like, no change. I'm like, that shouldn't happen. Like, it's your voice, it's your word. I've known you for 24 hours. Push back, it should be your voice. Don't push back to the point where you kill your chances of the piece running unless they're doing something that you feel that diminishes your voice and is trying to change ultimately what you're trying to say. I'd walk away in a minute from that. But it's usually pretty collaborative. It's just like you would with a professor or something like that when you're working through something. It's not hostile. It shouldn't be hostile. And I loved it. I loved working with people on these things. Yes?
You talked about minding your own personal life or personal
are the first person ones preferred or more powerful than some written about someone else? Or what is yours?
No, I think if you look at some of the best opinion writers nationally, and I would, in this case, I would look to some with the New York Times specific, they do this a lot. Nick Kristof does this a lot, where it's someone else's story. And adapting some great story that you hear. He has a platform to do it, and you can certainly adopt a platform to tell someone else's story. Now, what I will say is that some stories are fantastic, and you need to be able to make sure that an editor knows it's authentic, and that, because I could come up with some great stories of people who I'm not going to name the last name, and I mean, you get into kind of treacherous waters there with an editor. So I ran pieces like that, but I would have to talk to the person. I would have to confirm. I would have to just know that if you do that, you're going to have to bring that person forward in whatever way, and really have their buy-in as well. You had a question.
What should the end goal of the events be? Or do you need to have one in mind? And if so, should you be giving people a direct action to take, or is it more just sort of like a cerebral, let's try to invest people in this?
So should there be a call to action? Should op-ed pieces have something that you're asking of people in a way, and what should the goal of the piece be? And I think it's different for different types of writing. My goal, and it's also one of the reasons I say write while you're writing it, write down why you're doing it. Because I think that'll answer your question. With me, it was because I saw the trauma of suicide in my family, and even to this day, and I thought there will be people who will know people who are suffering with opioid addictions. They will know, and they'll see things that I saw in my brother, a few weeks before he died, that are recognizable. And if a few of those people intervened or talked to them or did something, then it was so worth writing it. So that would be in that case. But in an instance where there are many things where there are a call to action, the piece on AIDS funding, where it's for a general audience, but you want people to understand that in America, you don't hear about HIV and AIDS anymore, but it's a massive global issue. And that just like that child, a 6-year-old child in Aleppo that went viral, that we can't ignore those things, and sometimes it's just asking someone to check their conscience on an issue. Sometimes it's asking for policymakers to think differently about it and to fully understand an issue and to not neglect it. Yes?
There's not a formula for the writing process that, we're really using creativity and drawing from the professional personal experiences. Yet, my question is, in the academy, I would argue that creativity is not intuitive, and it's something that is not always recognized or praised. So I wonder your recommendations on helping cultivate a creative process when we're so focused on, either having analysis and paralysis and just really constantly, changing our thoughts. So I just don't really take on that.
It's a really interesting question. So it's in the academy and kind of the rigors of what you do. Creativity isn't necessarily front and center. And in some ways it's discouraged, is that fair to say? At least in what we're talking about. I would say it's like I used to play the trumpet, and at some point you probably did creative writing of some sort. So if I get the trumpet out now just because my 3-year-old asks me to do it, I'm just blasting away at it. But if I start really playing it, it's gonna come back to me, and William Tell Overture is gonna come back to me. So what I would say is that leave, as much as your mind can set aside the work you're doing, leave that. And even if it's creative writing, just in the creative writing of journaling, or if it's if you had a meal that was just incredible, and you want to write about that meal, and it sounds silly, right? But I do all sorts of weird little writing things just to break me out of habits and out of the rigors of my work thinking. So I would do that. Do things. If you paint, if you do anything that feels artistic, and I think those start to open up pathways in your brain that have been blocked by some of the incredible and important work that you're doing here. It's not a very satisfying answer, maybe, but I don't think there is a formula, but I think that it's like repetition. It's like exercise or something that you have to keep doing it and working on it. Yes.
I think probably most of us have not had an op-ed published before. And so it seems a little bit ambitious to start with like the New York Times or the Atlantic. So if you don't have publications under your belt that you're putting, with the piece that you're submitting, like what's a good place to start? Do you start with local publications or where do you sort of break into this?
Yeah, I would say, so first I would say, I remember I ran a piece by like a 16-year-old in Houston when I was at USA Today, a student who then went on to Harvard. And at the time, and then her mother reached out to me afterwards because it was a big deal for them. She had since she was published in the Houston Chronicle and other places. So first I would say judge your piece based on merit. First of all, don't sell yourself short just because you haven't been published. Because I would have people who would say, I published in the New York Times and LA Times and I have this book out and there are t-shirts and whatever it is. And it didn't matter when I got to the piece itself. And I had other people who had never been published like this young woman in Houston, and I published the piece. So see what the merits of the piece are, run it by people whom you trust. And, but that being said, I would start for smaller publications. You could publish a piece, you could do your kind of practice on Medium. You can publish there and see how it resonates. US News, there are a lot of places now that are looking desperately for opinion that comes from places that are unexpected. And so being published a lot isn't everything today, and big names aren't everything. They'd say, attach a name to it, and I had so much wretched copy that would come from Capitol Hill that it doesn't matter. It's the merits of the piece are what matter most. Yes?
So I have a question of the sort of a key difference between science writing and op-ed writing comes with that. In science writing, we're trained where sort of every sentence needs to be cited in a very specific way from a source that's verified. And you don't see references in op-eds. Sometimes you see links now on certain data points, but when you're submitting an op-ed, would you still like to see references provided even though they're not sort of in line, getting in the way of commentary, or just trust the fact checking?
Yeah, so science writing versus opinion writing and how you should think about citations and fact checking and all of that. We had a dedicated fact checker, and USA Today still does. And even when I submit pieces, I get queries about things that I have in my piece. I would hyperlink the heck out of anything that you do. I would not give the full name of the study in the body of the piece. I see that with like a 12-word name for the study. So still think about accessibility and how you want what the public face of the research is going to be. But absolutely, you're going to save yourself a lot of time, and really, to me, when I would see a piece that come in, it was fully fleshed out and fully sourced. I knew that I was dealing with a serious person who had put a lot of time and thought into it, and that this was not just slapdash thoughts that I had after a night of drinking. Yes?
How long should you keep trying to get a piece published before that it's not going to get published? And then in that case, I guess how long should you wait publishing on a different forum?
So how long should you wait for a piece to be published?
I know earlier you said that each place is kind of individual, but you keep trying to.
Well, how patient are you? That's the question. I think that you should, I always have a piece, I have a plan. It's kind of three places I'm thinking of, and I'll kind of go down the line. And in thinking about the 3 places, also do a timeline. Say, so if I want to go New York Times, I'm going to give them the full time. If I know that it's a piece that has a 5-day shelf life, then I'm going to build it in there. I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to pitch the Times on Monday. Tuesday evening, if I haven't heard back, I'm telling them I'm going to the Post. And kind of do it that way and stagger it. Anything else? Great questions. And I'm not just saying great questions. They're really good questions. Yes?
Thanks for the presentation. I perhaps don't have the scope of this now, but as someone who has your background on journalism, I'm wondering if op-eds are the only kind of pieces that we should think about, or like as outsiders, who work outside of the media industry are allowed to or invited to write, or is there any other kind that we should be thinking about, apart from op-eds and posts and Facebook?
I mean, I think you know what your public voice is, and you know where you are right now. I mean, I think that opinion writing happens everywhere. Op-eds, it's just one lane of opinion writing. So I wouldn't, this is a workshop about opinion writing and op-ed specific, but no, I mean, you can find my opinions all over the place, and they're not all, it's not all in op-ed writing. So I don't know that, the thing is, with op-eds, you're going and using someone else's platform that has several million readers already, and that's the value of that. But no, and in fact, when I talk about testing your voice and testing how you think about issues, you can do it in small places. You can, as simple as your own blog, or you could test your ideas in 140 characters on Twitter too. Those are places where you can kind of, the seed of a good op-ed idea, you can see how it resonates is in social spaces. Yes?
John, you mentioned that if you get an op-ed that's got a lot of references and so on, you sort of think, oh, this person's really got an evidence base maybe for it, even if those don't appear. Is it a strategy to ever submit kind of two versions, one of which is sort of really heavily referenced and sort of shows, yes, I can back up all these things, and another that's a clean version, knowing nobody's going to read that in USA Today, or nobody's going to read that in some place. I don't know what the best strategy is.
So the question is whether, when it comes to sourcing, whether you could submit two versions and whether that's maybe a good way to do it. Well, I think that the type of sourcing I'm talking about is stuff that would be embedded in the piece. So it's not so much that it's stopping the flow of even the argument or the writing. It's going to feel at home at whatever publication that you're targeting. But it just shows that you've done the fact checking. And the worst thing is when you run a piece and you have to run a correction, and no matter at what level of editing it is or what publication it is, doesn't feel good. I just think it helps. It's one more way to establish your credibility on an issue. Yes.
This is less to do with tips for us, and I'm just interested on your end, kind of. We've already talked a little bit about fact checking, and if you're using someone else's story, many of us work in global health, and I think it's easy to utilize people's stories in a way that might not fully be respectful or confidential and all of that. So to what extent on your end is that fact checking or whatever permission? I mean, I know it's an opinion piece, but I was just interested in what kind of measures your end takes when you receive pieces like that have utilized other people's stories or talk. I mean, you talk about Nick Kristof. We can talk about, what he's used and said or not said that are factual, not about certain things after being there for 2 days.
Yep.
So I'm just curious.
So I guess the question is it's how news organizations would vet those stories, and is your question also kind of the line of propriety of
propriety, respect for people's stories that you're using, I think.
So I'll come back to my story, the piece I did with Banafsha, the Uber driver. I didn't publish that piece until I had found a way to reach out to her and to tell her and to send the piece to her even, and to make sure that it was something that she was comfortable with. I wanted her, because it was just off a conversation. I didn't have any way to contact her. I even contacted Uber to try to get in touch with her, and I ended up doing it kind of through a back channel. But that was one where I would not have run the piece if I had not gotten her buy-in on it and her acceptance of the piece. I think you owe that to anyone that you're writing about, especially whether it be your own a personal blog or whether it be some place that's going to get several million views, that it is a matter of respect, but it's also a matter of honoring their story and not using it for what may be your means. So I think it's important. As far as what news organizations do, I think it's loose. And that's why I think that it's important for the writer to take ownership of that. Because an editor, they may not have time, or they may not have the same concerns for that person that you do, to be perfectly honest. How are we in time? Great, okay. All right. Any other questions?
You
Yes.
mentioned the distinction was submitted before. Could you explain the difference in how you go about thinking this? It sounds like they're two very different things.
They are. So the difference between an op-ed and a pitch and how to think about that. I think that's a great question. So the piece is the piece, right? The op-ed, or the pitch itself, and I write it separately, it's, I would say think short, 2-3 paragraphs tops, and I mean short paragraphs. So you meet someone on the street, it's an elevator, it's almost an elevator speech for an editor. Like, you have 6 floors to tell them why they should consider you and why they should get to the place where they're going to start reading the piece. So here's my background. This is an issue that I have some expertise on. I have been published in these different places. I'm willing to be edited, and I hope you consider this. I mean, it really is that simple. Anytime, and if you think of it as an elevator speech, I think that's going to be to your benefit, because it gets easy where you start feeling yourself doing these like linguistic gymnastics of it. And look, this is an issue where, you know, maybe I haven't written on this before, but here's why I met this person. I mean, don't start telling the story, and don't oversell or undersell. And I give just the facts, tell them why, and the headline really should pull them. It should be short enough where they see the headline and they're drawn in by that. Yes, and don't excerpt the piece, by the way, in the pitch. Don't do that. Yes.
Do you ever worry, when should you worry about like conflicts? Because like if you're writing about something that you're student at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, I guess like should you already worry that your opinion could be seen as like an extension of the school public health?
Well, as a student, I mean, I don't want to get in any trouble. No, I mean, I think you should think about that. That goes to the questions that you ask about why, when you're doing it. Is there any professional risk? I mean, you're associated. Are you writing it as a student, or are you writing it as someone who, I mean, because you could write about anything that has nothing to do with this school. You just happen to attend this institution. So I would go through the list, and I can get you the questions if you don't have them. I would go through those questions because I think that'll get you to a place where you start to understand, is there a professional risk? Is there an academic risk? Am I doing something that I'm not going to feel good about because of the school? I mean, those are all really, really important things to do before you even write it or certainly pitch it. All right. I think we have exhausted the questions. One more, yes.
You mentioned the news tag. How recent should that be? And then you also mentioned that your 3 paragraphs really get in touch with the reader. Should that ideally be within those first 3 paragraphs?
It should. Now, that's to get the attention of the editor. So in the editing process, if you feel like, or if the editor feels like you need to let the piece breathe a little bit at the top, then do that. I always say, if it's taken you a while and it feels like it's called throat clearing, it feels like someone's taking 3 or 4 paragraphs to clear their throat before they get to the thrust of it. It's the point when you start talking and stop clearing your throat. And it may be the second graph, it may be the first graph. I mean, but it's a place where if all I read was that, I'd kind of get the gist of what you're trying to do with the piece. And I wouldn't I said the first 3 paragraphs, because that's what editors generally look at, and that's how much time they have when they're reviewing a piece, a lot of times, if they were going to be honest. And so I would just make sure that you have done enough at the top to warrant that person reading on. And sometimes that means having the nut graph right there.
Thank you so much for participating.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.